speaker. Our next speaker is, Our next speaker is Andras Fužesi. And we will hear something on communicate through the feasting, long-term changes in the decoration of pedestal vessels in the Neolithic and Copper Age of the Great Hungarian Plain. Andras, can you hear me? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Andras. Can you hear me? We can see your presentation, but we cannot hear you, or at least I cannot. Okay. There is some problem with the microphone, I think. Still, there is no sound.
Still nothing. Andras, in 1 second we could hear you. Something is wrong with your microphone. There? Ništa, on je...
Maybe you can try to turn off the microphone with the headphones and.
Šta da kažem? Šta da uradim?
Still, there is no sound, Andras. If you can hear us, I can see that you are trying something with the microphone.
Miloš je sljedeći. Da. May I suggest something? Andras, can we switch between you and Miloš Spasić? Maybe if you could see what's going on with your microphone and to present your contribution in 20 minutes. Is that okay? Okay. Then I hope in 20 minutes that you will solve the problem with mic. Sorry, Maria.
Okay. Okay, so we are switching to our third presentation for today. And we are going to welcome Miloš Spasić now. He is going to present today on animals on spots, ornaments curating social interactions among late Neolithic Vinča culture communities. Miloš, are you there? Can you please? Yeah. Okay. Can you please? Yes, we can hear you. Hi, how are you?
Nice, you. On the field?
Fine, thank you. Can you please share your presentation with us? And we are eager to hear. It.
Let's see.
Okay, we can see it.
Everything fine?
Everything works fine.
Okay. So for today's presentation, I will present zoomorphic ornaments on Vinča culture vessels. Basically, I will give just a short spatio-temporal context for the study, so we could easily follow the presentation. So Vinča culture phenomena spread out through the whole Central Balkans and the neighboring regions. Judging by the list of the John Chapman published in his seminal book from 1981. There were more than 600 Vinča culture sites at that moment, and nowadays we have more than 1,000 sites registered after enormous field service carried out in last decade. So almost all of those sites are settlements, and only 2 necropolis are known from Vinča culture until now. Okay, so temporal aspect is roughly dated between the half of the 6th millennium until the half of the 5th millennium. And in the sense of relative chronology, there are a lot of relative chronological schemes developed for the For the Vincha culture, I will be using slightly modified chronology of Vladimir Milicic, which actually divides Vincha culture into 4 main phases: Vincha A, Vincha B, Vincha C, and Vincha D. Okay, so my corpus includes material from 13 principal Vincha culture sites in nowadays Serbia. As you can see in the graph, all Vincha culture sites are dated from almost all of them are multi-layered and are dated from whole Vincha A until the Vincha D period. Some of them are single-layered sites, which offer insight into the regional setting. And for those multi-layered sites, we have had an opportunity to study the development of ornaments on that site. Okay, so our corpus includes 4 major types of material culture, and those are zoomorphic vessels, altars, prosopomorphic lids, and vessels with various types of zoomorphic ornaments and applications. Okay, so you see on this slide zoomorphic vessels of Vincha culture communities. Those are very rarely found on Vincha culture sites. Usually they are connected with Vincha B until Vincha C phases. We don't see them in later Vincha culture phases. They're exquisite art objects that were up until now found only on several sites, with Vincha itself being the most prominent one with several such objects. Also, we have them on sites of Grivac, Belovode, and Belovode. Vršac also. Okay, altars are the second category where we see some zoomorphic ornaments or animal-derived figures on them. As much as you know, Vincha culture altars are very famous objects. Those are objects that are present throughout whole period of Neolithic on a wider regional scale. So those are very shallow receptacles with modeled human or animal heads placed on the rim of those tiny vessels, which are rested on the very low feet, and there are a lot of them found on the Vincha culture sites, and we see that the recipient can be the recipient can be rectangular, square, or triangular, and that multiple and various types of heads could appear at the corners of those vessels. First one I am showing you today is one very early example of Vincha culture altar, and I'm showing it because it actually represents the birth of this concept. It originated from the rescue excavation in Western Serbia from Asinske Nive, and we actually see very early Vincha culture altar, which has almost whole figurine attached to its rim, unlike in later and period and in much of the corpus where we have only heads attached to the rim. In this case, we have whole Vincha culture figurine. At the one corner and at the other corner, we have a horned animal. This is just an example for you to see how those things looks like. Those are specimens from Belovode and Plochnik. I forgot to say that the main principle in Vincha culture altar is that the heads are always turned to the outside of the vessel. Those are examples from other Vincha culture sites. It is really interesting to notice that we have on several of them we have both human and animal imagery employed and applied on the rim. and also that we have sometimes that we have various type species of animals modeled on the rim. Okay, and those are really kind of rare and special finds of altars. At your left side, you can see famous altars with deer heads modeled on the rim. They're especially known from the Neolithic sites in central Serbia, and the first one occurred during the excavation of copper mine in Rudna Glava. At your right side, you can see examples of altars from Medvednjak, that is the site in eastern Serbia. We get them also in southern Serbia and in the territory of Kosovo. What is unusual on them is that the animality of the vessel is not represented by attaching head or head of the animal, but it is denoted by modeling the legs of the altars in the shape of animal legs. Okay, this is the third category, which is really important. Those are prosopomorphic lids, which are typical for Vinča culture. We find them from the beginning of Vinča culture until, let's say, Vinča D1 period. We don't have them in late Vinča D1, and we don't have them at all at Vinča D2. So they are basically have been interpreted in various ways. Majority of interpretations are going between are those animal images or are those human images? In my dissertation, I have interpreted them as hybrid images. That is, as images of hybrid creatures, half human, half animal. As you can see at the chart, the height to rim diameter ratio speaks that those objects are around 8 centimeters high, and the same goes for the rim diameters. Okay, and our last category is the most common one. We have vessels that are decorated with animal ornaments in different ways. The first one are bowls with protomed, which are very similar with altars, but are bigger and real-sized vessels, deeper, and vessels with greater capacity and volume, with attached human and animal heads on the rims, and unlikely with altars, those heads are always turned at the interior of the vessel. Some examples of those bowls with protomels. We have also zoomorphic applications that were modeled or incised on the belly of the vessel. At the left side, you can see an incised ornament in the shape of the geometric representation of quadruped animal. Those kind of incised ornaments were up until very recently almost exclusively defined as being the famous Vinča culture signs. And nowadays we are seeing that much of those signs are actually representing generic animals. At your right side, you're seeing the other type of animal representation, which are plastically applied heads, which are usually modeled at the bellies of amphoras and bowls. And for the last one, we have zoomorphic ornaments or applications on the handles, where we have plastically modeled animal heads modeled on the top of the horn-like candles of intracultural. So let us see what is the temporal aspect of our corpus. As you can see, majority of our corpus is very important for Vinča culture communities, and we see that all of the Vincha culture communities were producing these objects from the beginning until the end of the whole of development of Vincha culture, except for the zoomorphic candles, which are only produced in a later Vincha culture, and except for zoomorphic vessels and lids, which ceased to exist at the time of Vincha D phase. Okay, now let us see what kind of images and animal species we can recognize on in the corpus we have analyzed. Majority of species are highly stylized. So many of them are representing just animal, and we cannot securely decide what animal it is. The other part of corpus goes to secure representations of bovines and birds, which are often represented. I must say at this moment that this data is consistent with the data of animal representations in other media, such as figurines and cranias and other objects, which show same principles. So stylized animal is the most common animal that is represented. Of course, that can be interpreted in several ways. We can say that the Vincha culture communities actually produced a well-known image of a certain animal species that we cannot conclude what kind of species it is. And the second way of interpretation could be that actually it isn't important what kind of animal species it is, but that the animality itself is the most important in this kind of representation. I will just a little bit go through a context of finds. A lot of vessels with zoomorphic ornamentations or vessels shaped in animals in animal form are found in secure contexts, such are bird-like vase from the autonomous site of Vincha, which was discovered in something which looks like a deposit of vessels which followed some very important event. Some of the finds were also like balls with protoma, also from Vincha and Stubline, were found in house closing deposits. And also, as we saw, some of the objects were found in sites such as Rudna Glava, which are copper mining sites. So there are some differences in context of find of these objects. Also, I wanted to say that this is a really interesting example of how when prosopomorphic lids completely disappeared from the production in Vincha culture, we see them at the very late stages of Vincha culture. We see them in completely miniature form. We have several examples of miniature prosopomorphic lids from Grivac and Vincha, which were produced at a very, very small scale. And as a conclusion, I wanted to draw attention to two facts that sometimes the function of an ornament or an object is highly is not to be reached in currently, but that is not the reason not to try to think about the activities in which those objects were used. So we're seeing that the zoomorphic objects also, and objects with zoomorphic applications, were used in various activities, such as in ritual activities which are connected with house forming and house closing deposits. We see that also, although we don't know the exact symbolism and, as Ilya said, the meaning of those ornaments, we see that they have strong rhetorics and that they did their job. Also, we see that some of the zoomorphic ornaments, which were usually connected with one side of gendered arena, social arena in Neolithic, that now became, or age arena, now become transgendered and trans age. So we are seeing bull as a symbol which was usually interpreted as being masculine, masculine symbol, usually connected only with men. We see them also in the female side of arena. We see them in pottery. We see at your right side, you can see bovine astrogals, which were used as loom weights at Gomolava. This is really something something special. And also we can see that the animal imagery was used in child side of human social arena. So those are things which we can grasp on until we find enough clues to deal with function and meaning and symbolism. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Milos. I know how interested you are in this topic. We do have a little time left, and there is already a question from Kotova. Dear Milos, to which period of Vinci belong altars from table 39? Send to me, please, a publication of vessels from table 39. I have their analogies in the linear pottery culture.
I understand. Let me see what it is. This one? Okay, I will see in the chat and I will send.
Excuse me, next maybe.
Next one, okay.
Next. This from the right.
From the right. Those are from Medvedniak site in Eastern Serbia.
And which period of Vinci is
it? Should be Vinci C.
Okay, thank you.
I can share the publication.
Thank you very much.
Don't worry.
Okay, does anyone have a question? We do have time for maybe one. Or we will leave them for later. Milos, thank you very much for jumping in. We will see now, we will move if Andras is ready to share his presentation, and if those technical difficulties were solved out. Andras, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Andras? I see that you are here with us. Can you try? There is more feedback for Milos in the comment section, but still there is no sound from Andras. I saw that there is plan B, like someone else reading. Instead?
Yes, he just sent me his text and I will read it out if it's okay with you.
With us, it's completely, sorry, the tech is not in my side. Okay.
Of course, it's okay. Yes, if you can manage that way, yes.
Yeah. He's going to push the button. I'm going to read the text like in good old times.
Okay, I already announced this presentation, so you have 15 minutes left and we are eager to hear it.
Okay, can I start? So my presentation will focus on the long-term development of a particular group of vessels. It aims to reflect on the social role of the feasting based on a vessel type used for meals and its decoration. The social significance of the feasting is no longer in question among cultural anthropologists, sociologists, even archaeologists. The role and multifunctional use of pottery in prehistory is also well known. The socio-cultural significance and mediating function of the style has been recognized in recent decades in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. The linking of three aspects is an approach to define the connections between a human social habitus of action, the technological potential of a multiple tool, and the cognitive potential of a visual item. The Great Hungarian Plain is a centrally located area of the Carpathian Basin between Transdanubia and the Transylvanian Basin. This threefold division was already present at the beginning of the Neolithic period in the case of the Starchevo-Körös-Klis cultures. The fact that the first farming communities occupied only the periphery of the western basin, the southern half of the central lowland, and the whole of Transylvania determined the cultural development of each region in later times. In the course of this process, a series of local cultures emerged in each area, and the importance of the Southeast European tradition of the Carpathian Basin during the Neolithic and the Copper Age is clearly evident, not only in the rich anthropomorphic material on which Maria Gimbutas based her narrative of Old Europe. The time frame of the analysis covers 2,500 years between 6,000 K BC and 3,500 K BC. A detailed chronology was established during the 20th century, and although Ferenc Pulszky presented his concept about an independent Copper Age in the Carpathian Basin still in the 19th century. He based it on the emergence of early metalworking, which was later supplemented by the theory of the disappearance of the late Neolithic tells. However, in contrast to the temporal spatial phasing that dominated structural archaeology, other analytical and interpretative perspectives emerged, emphasizing processes and continuity. Detlef Gronenborn's adaptive cycle has given a new basis for studies covering long time. The successive stages of development had been applied by Ian Hodder to define the basic core of the conceptual thinking of Neolithic and Copper Age cultures. This was an idea of domus and agrios. It is necessary to note here that the longue durée analysis in this presentation is made possible by the fact that there was a continuous evolution in the selected area between the 6th and the 4th millennia BC. In other words, the observations made on the ceramics of the selected finds can be pieced together and ordered into series, so the trends observed are real processes. The next methodological problem is the archaeology of feasting. As there is a large literature on the subject, I will now only briefly mention 3 types of contexts where the issue can be archaeologically investigated. In the second half of the 6th millennium BC, large clay pits deposited most of the archaeological material. Some of them can be interpreted as structured deposits. The long pit excavated at the Selevény Telekpart site contained a large quantity of pottery in a single layer on which 4 graves were placed. In the late Neolithic, deliberately burnt houses provided a context that effectively preserved the imprints of the actions that took place here. In one of the buildings of the Herpálytel, 3 adjacent rooms were furnished in a similar way. The pottery inventories were used for food processing and consumption. In the independent cemeteries of the early Copper Age, very rich ceramic material was placed in some of the graves. In the assemblages, which could be interpreted as real sets, the types of vessels used for serving and consumption. In addition to the fortunate contexts, the archaeological study of the feast can be carried out by the detailed processing of the ceramic material. P-archaeology's approach and methods allow us to research the life history of individual objects and thus to find information about the events in which they were used. There are different possibilities for defining the function of each vessel for different uses. Long-term storage can cause deposition of residues. Processing, especially involving heat, can often result in traces of use, less often residues. In the case of consumption, the identification of use traces is much less possible than, for example, abrasion traces on the bottom of the vessels. But what about serving? The evidences are mostly indirect. There is a topos in archaeology that pedestal vessels were used for serving. This can be tested by a comparative analysis of the shapes and dimensions of the vessels. To take a realistic picture about the evaluation of pedestal vessels, we need to place them within the full range of vessels of a culture. In the picture, the typical vessels of each culture are shown in the same scale and in similar order from top to bottom: cups, bowls, jugs, pots, and storage jars. The frequency of each type is diverse, but some similarities can be identified. For example, the predominance of different types of pots in almost each period. Pedestal vessels, highlighted in yellow, appear among the small and medium-sized vessels, typically bowls, deep bowls, with closed vessels only occurring in the later periods. The summary table does not show the former variability of pedestal vessels. In the early Neolithic, we find examples of conical, spherical, and carinated bowls on low pedestals. The formal development of the type began in the Orford linear pottery culture. The medium and large pedestal bowls are mainly conical, with exceptions, for example, the face pot from Kennesley. In the late Neolithic, bowls of various shapes appeared on increasingly higher pedestals, while low and medium pedestals were typical among restricted vessels. In addition to the Tisa culture, the Herpai and Chursalom cultures also produced a variety of forms in this type. In the Herpai tile material, small and medium-sized pedestals were also found in significant numbers among pots and amphorae. Among the finds of the Chursalom type, bowls with painted decorations stood on tall, conical, sometimes bell-shaped pedestals. In the early Copper Age, pedestal bowls of different sizes and shapes were characterized by perforations. The group of vessels included opened and closed vessels of various shapes. On the next two slides, I have collected the most common types and patterns of pottery decoration. I have marked the versions specific to the pedestal vessels separately, with blue coloring only the designs specific to the pedestals, yellow the upper part of the vessels, and red for both parts. In the early Neolithic, the pedestal bowls were decorated exclusively with burnished red slip. The most important decoration of the early Orford linear pottery culture were patterns of incised lines, painted surfaces, and bands. Almost all of these were also found on pedestal vessels, where the upper and lower parts were decorated in a similar way. In the later groups of the culture, the decoration of the lower and upper part may have been different, while in the case of the painted pottery of the North Great Hungarian Plain, the earlier traditions continued. It is important to note that the pottery of the Szakáhat and Bükk cultures hardly ever contained any pedestal vessels. The late Neolithic Tisa culture is characterized by incised decoration, symmetrical and sequenced patterns, and meanders. The Herpai style is defined by painted rhombus, fishbone, and lattice patterns. The ceramics of the Chursalom combined elements of these two styles with both incised and painted versions of rhombus, fishbone, and meander patterns. Of these, the pedestals showed mainly space-filling patterns. In the early Copper Age, rhombus and meander-based patterns were dominant, created using incised and engraved techniques. On the upper part of the vessels, these decorative elements were combined with plastic elements. Perforations were common on the pedestals, either alone or in combination with incised or engraved patterns. The main trends for pedestal vessels can be identified by the following elements. Three categories can be distinguished on the basis of the ratio between the size of the upper part and the size of the pedestal. In each of the three sizes, the shapes of the pedestals are different. The types of upper vessel parts varied depending on the period and culture. In the early Neolithic, a few basic types of bowls occurred in the low category. In the middle Neolithic, the spectrum was extended, typically in the medium category. The late Neolithic materials show the greatest variety in vessel shapes. In addition to the various shapes of bowls, pots, jugs, and amphorae were also found in the medium and large pedestal categories. In the early Copper Age, the range of shapes was similarly wide, but the emphasis was on the high category of sizes. The long-term trends show general increase of the size of pedestals and extension of their shape diversity. In this context, the basic trends and the decoration of pedestal vessels have also changed. While in the early Neolithic, the red slip was the only decoration of the type, the increase in the size of the pedestals led to emergence of two equally important vessel parts characterized by both symmetry and contrast. This duality of form was reflected in decoration used later. The dominant patterns of the Middle Neolithic were based on the opposition and the mirroring of the two parts of the vessel. They also used a light-dark contrast by painting the background and the inside of the patterns. In the late Neolithic, the upper and lower parts of tall pedestal bowls were decorated with completely different patterns, either a rhombus pattern or a zigzag pattern, reflecting the idea of top and bottom were used on the pedestals. The symmetrically varying arrangement remained predominant in the early Copper Age pedestals. However, the contrast between the two parts of the vessels was emphasized by the plastic elements of the upper parts and the perforated decoration of the pedestals. By the second half of the Middle Neolithic and the Late Neolithic, the patterns on the pedestal vessels had developed into a distinctive system, and this continued in a simplified form into the early Copper Age period. To examine this question in more detail, we need to analyze the initial period of the process. The changes in the range of vessels in the Middle Neolithic of the northern Great Hungarian Plain are summarized in the figure. During the 600 years of development, the functional category of storage and processing hardly changed at all, while serving and consumption showed a quantitative and qualitative increase. New types of vessels, new shapes, and new decoration have emerged in the latter area. In this context, pedestal vessels have not developed at the same dynamic as the other types. After a variety of shapes and decoration, they have become a specific part of the inventory and have limited. This process can only be interpreted as a progressive development with the addition of deep bowls, cups, and jugs, in which a specific set of vessels was created, and each type of vessel had its own unique character within this pottery inventory. The interpretation of the function of pedestal vessels is possible at different levels, depending on the particular possibilities of each find and assemblage. The pedestal bowl with inner painted decoration from the settlement of Polgár Csőszhalom illustrates the interpretation level of the artifacts. In the concentric pattern, the bands ended in several lines. The same patterns were used to represent hands on the anthropomorphic vessels at this site. Thus, it is perhaps not unreasonable to assume that the pattern suggests hands reaching into the bowl at the same time, namely a communal meal. The assemblage of Csőszhalom tel included stone tools made of different raw materials, spondylus, bracelet, and specific clay objects. Also included 4 miniature pedestal bowls. The assemblage embodied long-distance connections, so represented the social network of the local community. The presence of miniature vessels referring to feasting in the example underlines the role of this action in social interaction. A good example of the interpretation of pedestal vessels at the site level is the item from Öcsöd Kovászhalom. The perforated pedestal was mostly 4 legs and a disc, forming an object similar to a house or sanctuary models from Southeastern Europe. The lower disc showed concentric circles and doubled knobs. The specific history and interpretation of the artifact found in the 1980s was completed in 2018 when a magnetometric prospection revealed a triple ditch system surrounding the site, which has multiple entrances. Based on the settlement structure modeled in the lower part of the bowl, the pedestal vessels were also able to carry and communicate additional symbolic messages. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Martin. First, thank you, Andras, for this wonderful presentation, although you were not able to read it yourself. And also I want to thank Martin for reading it. clearly. We do have one question from Anders, and I informed him about it. It's from Ilya. But I don't know if you are able, I suggested maybe to write directly or to write to everyone the answer. So Ilya asked, did you count the ratio of pedestal vessels